Hello, Chicagoans. I'm back in my hometown. I make it here every year. It's always during August, though, the hottest time, and I'm so happy that this time I'm here, and it's like Santa Monica weather, which is now my hometown. Let me just get this. We can get past the tech part of it. Okay. Sorry, we could have had this. There we go. Well, I know that's not me.
This one, no?
Okay, hold on a second.
No?
What happened to Kathy, the other Kathy, our tech support person here? Oh, Penny, sorry about that. She had it hooked up before for me. Okay. Alrighty. And you, let's see if that works. Maybe. Okay, we got it. We're in business. All right. Okay, I was told a little to talk about my background. In my former life, I was a clinical psychologist. But you never know where life is going to lead you. Actually, when I lived here, I thought I was going to go into the acting field, and I was a student at the Goodman Theater, where I did productions. And I usually don't talk about this part of the stuff because most people can't relate to that, but since you're in Chicago, and you know where this is. And so I was, I'd grown up with community theater and so forth like that. And I went to New York, landed up in New York City, where I then made another maneuver and switched from, because sometimes, like I said, I do things backwards, and I went into the news field. I worked for WCBS News in New York, and a story that I was working on led me to the New York City Ronald McDonald House. It was the first house opened there, and it was for kids who were experiencing cancer, being treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital. And I know you have a Chicago house here as well. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came to speak and talked about visualization and a lot of things. And there was nothing in the library at the Ronald House that dealt with death and dying. And since my undergraduate degree is from NYU in journalism, I thought I would write a book on death and dying. Now, this is interesting, I'm saying, because I had not had a near-death experience at the time, but I had read a lot, and I'd also had a lot of mystical experiences. I'd had out-of-body experiences. So I kind of put this together, and I'm thinking, here I wrote about it years before actually having my own. So just to make a long story short in that respect, I wrote this book. And by the way, for some of you who will recognize the name, Carolyn Mace was the one that edited the book. It was called The Door to the Secret City, and it's now under many different a 6-part series called Freddie Brenner's Mystical Adventures. And this was before Carolyn Mace became famous for writing, Anatomy of Spirit with Dr. Norman Shealy. And so when this book was published, I was asked to speak to therapy groups. I was asked to speak to, now that one's still not working. I was asked to speak with therapists, and they all thought I was a therapist. And they started asking, now, what are your credentials again? And at the time, all I had was a bachelor degree. And that somewhat intimidated me, so I went back to school and actually went for my master's degree, then worked for a while, and then before I finally went on to get my psychology degree. And I had a practice for many years. So what happened, did we lose our picture again? What happened there?
Wiggle the mouse.
Wiggle the mouse? No? No? Well, okay. I'll keep talking. If you get it, you get it. So anyway, I was clinically practicing. I'm not going to give you my whole life story because there was many twists and turns in there. Like I said, I had to go through a lot of things before I decided what I wanted to be when I grew up, and then I found out there was still more chapters to go. So anyway, I'm practicing therapy, and I have a nice session with somebody, and I'm getting ready to leave. It was a particularly interesting session, and I remember the person in it, she was a Buddhist, and she was talking about that there was this unbelievable connection that night with, that was a holy day for the Buddhists. And I didn't think anything of it, but she said, look at the moon and so forth like that. And I remember going to my car, looking at it, but nothing, seeing anything unusual. And just as I'm going to my car, I feel this whoosh come right out of my heart area. And with it, immediately I feel this sense of emptiness, a profound sense like I'd never felt before, and a feeling like I was done with my work here on earth as I knew it. Now that is a bizarre feeling to have, but I was sure I was done. And I thought, am I getting ready to die if I'm done? And then I thought, well, what if I'm not getting ready to die? And what if I'm going to live another 20, 30, whatever years, and I have to experience this profound sense of emptiness? This is not going to feel good. And so I couldn't figure out what this meant, so I went home. And I was sitting up contemplating this, because immediately I go into the analytical mode. Are you depressed? Are you anxious? And I wasn't feeling any of those stuff. I mean, I had the normal stressors in my life, but there was nothing in it that was profoundly disruptive to make me feel this way. And so as I was sitting there thinking about this, all of a sudden I saw this swirling vortex in my head, and it went faster and faster, and the next minute I found myself sucked into this tunnel, horizontal, feet first, traveling at a high rate of speed, and I could see light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I had enough therapy for people, and of course I'd written this book ages ago, that I said, is this the tunnel? Is this the tunnel everybody's been talking about? And if that's the light, did I just die? And if I just died, what did I die of? I wasn't sick. You know, all these thoughts are going through your head. You think, oh, I have to, it's like if I'm going to pass over. And all these thoughts were happening very quickly as I was getting closer to this light. And it was just like say, well, okay, if I'm dead, there's not much I can do about it now. Let's just go with the feeling and see what this is about. This is now your great adventure. And so I was okay with that. I mean, I didn't feel a sense of that I was leaving anything terribly, behind that I needed to finish. And so as I got closer to the light, I could feel it. And then I came to a screeching halt, right before the entrance to this light, you might say. And I just hovered there. And nothing I could do could make me go forward. I mean, I tried to will myself to go forward. With what I felt of this, what I had of what I thought was my body at the time, trying to push it in, and nothing happened. And I just, as I said, I just hovered there. And then I had the thought, well, this is boring. And with that thought, this is boring, all of this energy poured into me like an implosion. And I could feel it in what I would have believed was every cell of my body if I had a body. And it spun me back around with great intentional force and sent me back through the tunnel the same crazy way, horizontal, feet first. And I could hear voices in my head saying, breathe, Kathy, breathe. And the next minute, I found myself back in my physical body, and my whole left side was paralyzed, and I couldn't move, and I was by myself. Now I'm continuing to hear these voices in my head, and I knew they were telling me, which is no way to this day I can prove this since I wasn't in a hospital, was that my heart had stopped, and they were trying to get me to breathe life back into my physical form. And since there was no one to help, I listened to them. And I jokingly always say, when you're a psychologist and you're hearing voices in your head, it is not a comforting feeling. But I had no choice. And they were really just saying, relax, everything's going to be okay, breathe easy, it'll be fine. And what I started to feel them doing was working on my body and clicking. It was like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And I could start to feel some of it, some of my left side, and then all of a sudden, a big click, and it all went in. And as I'm listening to them, I'm thinking to myself, but I'm still feeling this pressure in my chest area. And now I've got to go see a cardiologist. And they said, no, it's okay. You don't need to see a doctor. Everything will be fine. Now, sometimes it's not the near-death experience that is the most interesting thing. It's what comes after it. That's the most exciting part of the journey. You know, I didn't see all the angels and dead people and so forth. In fact, they said, you've already done this a number of times. You don't need that whole, big to-do. It's because, and I felt like when I was at one point in the tunnel, somewhat of a feeling like of deja vu. I've done this before. And so when I got back into my physical body, within 24 hours after returning to my physical body, I was suddenly obsessed with quantum physics. Now, coming to this, I was not a newbie about spirituality. My mother was a dowser. And I had had experiences before. And all those experiences did lead me to where I'm going now. But I wasn't prepared for this scientific component because science was not my thing. And in fact, what they were telling me was, actually what was happening was that I was getting up between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m. every morning to research all of these ideas going through my head. It became this sort of magnificent obsession, and I could not go back to sleep until I looked up every single one on the internet of what they were telling me, about dimensional levels and energy and scientists I'd never even heard of. And the interesting thing was they were correcting what I was reading. They were saying, well, that's not quite accurate, but that's as far as you guys have gotten so far, in essence. And I can tell you only one aspect of what they corrected, because it would take another lecture here to do that. Is, they go to the super collider in Stern, Switzerland, where they're looking for the God particle. I can't find it. Because there's no end to infinity, to matter, and to being, and everything else. We are living in one big fractal universe. It goes on. We're within finite boundaries. But within those finite boundaries is an infinite dimensional world that goes on and on and on. So I said that's a whole other subject matter. So I'm like, wow, this is really cool, and I'm really understanding what I'm hearing. It's not like I could go out and teach quantum science, the next day, but I was understanding it, and I was surprised I was understanding it. And this was going on night after night after night, and I wasn't tired the next morning. But I noticed that after my near-death experience, when I was going in to treat my clients, I was feeling everything they were feeling. That also was not a very comfortable place to be, because I knew that if they were angry, I could feel their anger. So like I said, this was happening night after night, and I didn't know what this was all about, this sudden obsession with it. So I called up a good friend of mine, and he is a very gifted medium and intuitive, medical intuitive, and he had worked with me on very difficult cases in the past. With the client's permission, he could come in and look behind the scenes what was going on with the client. He never wanted to know anything about the client except their name and their permission. So it was a nice, clean read, nothing to be said in there. And he would give me some tremendous insights on how to treat some of these really, really difficult cases. Because I had, which is another story I'll go into a little bit later, the client caseload I had. And so I said, Gene, I would like you to take a look and see what's going on behind the scenes with me. And he took a really long time, it kind of scared me. And he said, oh, this is really interesting. You almost died.
And he said, but the interesting thing is, all your old guidance has left. That was that wood coming out and that profound sense of emptiness. Now, I wasn't even aware that I had all this, that guidance when they leave, they could leave the sense that you just lost your family, your friends, and everyone else. I didn't know what that meant, and it suddenly clicked into place. He said, you have this whole new set of guides, and he said, they're very technologically oriented, almost kind of geeky. And I said, well, what do they want? And he said, well, hold on a second, because it's very complicated here. So he looked and he said, they're showing me pictures. He said, well, looks like you came back to invent or to develop or something, some type of medical device. And I said, what? and I said, I don't know anything about inventing. I don't know anything about medical devices. He says, no. He says, they're showing me that they will point you to the right people that will be instrumental in helping you, and that you will, you're not going to be alone on this. And he says, but it will change people's concepts of healing. That's all they're showing me I can see so far. So I laughed. And I said, well, his batting average has been pretty good up until now. But this does not sound like the life I have planned for myself, to go into engineering, inventing, and so forth. Well, the universe was kind of sitting back and laughing at that point, because you never know what the universe has in store for you, what you think you're going to become. So I kind of fought it for a while, but as I started to fight it, I started to hear them speaking to me. And as they were speaking to me, they started to let me know, you have pre-planned this before you came back in. This was part of your contract. Now, I wasn't feeling coerced, but they let me know that I had made the choice to come back and do this. And that, in essence, I would be remembering what I had already known for a millennium. And be relearning this. And so one of the first things that they started telling me, and that's what I teach about some of the stuff that they told me, which is fascinating. And maybe I have to stop. This was in May of 2003. Some of the stuff you may already know now, being that you're more probably an enlightened group than most groups that I would speak to, except maybe at the ARE. And they started to tell me that everything in our world has a mathematical signature to it. And excuse the expression, I said, oh shit, because math was my worst subject in school. I just eked by my graduate records exam going into my master's level. I tried to get a book to explain the math formulas, and I needed a book to explain that book. Because I did not have the math team. I was not wired for that. And, I did well in all my other studies, but I didn't, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm thinking this is a nightmare. But sometimes life gives you your greatest gifts disguised as nightmare. So anyway, they started to tell me that everything, of course, has a mathematical signature to it. Our DNA is mathematically coded. That we see these repeated sequencing patterns in all of nature. And that we needed to speak to the consciousness of ourselves in a language that understood, which was math. And he said, you know that even vitamin C has a mathematical signature? Even love has a mathematical signature? When we send things into outer space, what do? We want other civilizations to know what we've learned. We send it in that formula because it is a universal language. So it's incorporated into everything, whether it be the pyramids, the monuments, even the Greeks in the Pythagorean sciences saw the numbers were vibrations. And they spoke in a language. So it makes me, as scientists are asking, is God really a mathematician? Well, I like to think it's all about love too, not just math. So anyway, what the next thing that they did was they started to have me understand that that the brain is wired to understand numbers in a whole different way than we think about. And interesting for most people is if you've ever seen the TED interview by Jill Taylor, the neuroscientist, anatomist who had a left-sided stroke, and she observed herself during the course of the stroke, and she saw things in squiggles and numbers. You know, we don't see things. You know, we don't actually see through our eyes. I know that sounds very strange. We see it through our occipital lobe that takes images and puts it, and that's why most of us see the world maybe slightly different than others. And we see things as numbers first. It's sort of like Oliver Sacks and that man that saw his woman as a hat or something like that, or they see and identify colors. That layering is a little bit different, but she could observe herself and that her brain was decoding these numbers, and eventually that would feed it into words, phrases, pictures, and so forth. So numbers are a great way of reading reality, and that's what they began to show me. I usually have a clicker. I don't know if this clicker works. All right, let's see. There we go. Okay. So we want to understand DNA. I'm going to give you a little lesson too in this, and I'll get back a little bit to some of the spiritual stuff that they talked to me about. But that DNA is our internal programming software. It stores information. It's like a biological internet, and it dictates our genetic heritage. It dictates, how we age, how we evolve, it tells our body what to do, and years ago, we only understand about 5% of our DNA, which is still amazing to me, even at the stage when we've done the genome project and everything else. And that other 95% we consider junk DNA. Well, my guides have told me, basically that is where our evolutionary cycle is stored, in that junk DNA, or what we termed junk DNA, and that it is slowly evolving right now. This is a critical time in our evolutionary process, and this is actually an exciting time to be alive. All of you have decided to be here, to witness some of this incredible evolution. It goes back to Sir Francis Crick's time when he found the double helix, and to understand that was one of the most astounding findings of the 20th century. And he also, by the way, as a little aside, he said that DNA was so complicated that it could only have been brought here by a higher intelligence from another world. It was not found on here, and that's also another lecture. So, what they started to say was, you're all familiar with frequencies. We've heard that bandy back and forth. That's a pun, bandy, bandwidth. And this is actually our standard norm for measuring energy. Frequencies, which means cycles per second. Revolution, how fast it's going, whether it be slower frequencies like delta or theta, faster frequencies like beta, and so forth like that. But they said, don't think in frequencies. You don't have to think in frequencies. There is a faster route into intelligence and information and the body, and they called it non-Hertzian waves. Some people call it subtle energy. And this is believed to be associated with health and the natural healing process. These terms, by the way, were first used by the great inventor and visionary Nikola Tesla, who just never got his due, except for maybe a car. And he described this new form of energy. And Einstein also used it to distinguish between energy which cannot be measured and which is inadequate. And this is pure information patterns in this subtle energy. And that's why even our scientists today are trying to scramble, especially the quantum physicists, to find new forms to measure this. And when they do, we'll perhaps have most of those really wonderful studies all the regular, traditional medical profession has been calling for a long time in this field that we call subtle energy and healing energy. Okay, but there's also another level that they talk to me about, called the super quantum potential level. It resides outside of fourth dimensional time and space. It's like quantum potentials for anything and how they make connections with stuff. It's a higher dimensional level. It's beyond even subtle energy. And it's called spiritual energy. So it took about a year. Now, remember I told you I kind of fought this idea that you're going to put together some type of device. And I thought, no, I'm not. Okay. But it was a persistent thing that would not go away. And they first started with taking things that I was interested in, like, oh, I had some vitamins. Well, you know that you can actually, we can give you the mathematical algorithm for that vitamin, and you would have to take the vitamin. Well, that suddenly intrigued me. You know, it's like they reeled me right in. So for a whole year, I sat and started working with them on every type of element, solid, liquid, minerals, motions, symbols, concepts. And by the way, they have some pretty strange symbols in there I've never seen anywhere. I can only think that they're off-planetary. Gems. Hundreds and thousands of different substances, and to be able to incorporate that into certain things where we could then give them to human subjects. Now, I never really thought that far down the line, because if I thought that far down the line, it would scare me, because I had no idea what I was in for. And sometimes they only give you as much as you need to know. Otherwise, you'll go crazy. Or you still think you're going crazy. And behind every one of these things, they also said how important it was for the algorithm, and that's what they call these formulas, consisting of number patterns, that these algorithms, that they needed to have the pure algorithm for water. Water was the greatest conductor of energy, and by the way, most of you probably are in here dehydrated as we talk. So at this point, I'm going to take a sip. Not on my guys saying drink more water. Okay. Because it facilitates the energy flow of information to the body. Now, the next thing besides these formulas, now, the numbers going through my head, and today I was just going down the street and I was looking at houses, a street level, addresses, and immediately I was formulating them into numbers, down to one number or so forth, and two numbers and so forth like that. So they kind of started to work with the side of my head to start seeing numbers in a different way. I would like to go back, no I really wouldn't, but to retake the GRE and see how well I would do at this stage. So the other thing I was told about was a thing called fractals. Now, I truly had never heard of a fractal until then. This was before the books came out about the fractal universe by Brady. And fractals are like holograms and elements of a hologram and are contained in the human body. And they told me that we are all fractals of God. Now, that really gave me something to think about. I am God, we are all God, we are all part of God, we are a fractal. Now, if you want to know what a fractal, you can kind of, it's like those Matryoshka dolls. Matryoshka dolls, a doll, Mariska, thank you, I take that wrong. A doll within a doll within a doll to infinity. You can cover each one, and that is like a fractal. And when you do that, it creates an energy, and that energy creates power. And practicality is really kind of like the new science of life. It they told me that if you couple fractals with mathematical codes, you would amplify all that information coming through to the person. New concept. Now, I haven't actually read that anywhere, but that's what they told me. It creates an electrical field that creates a charge, which makes our DNA work more coherently. So, there's also kind of a fail-safe built in as well to that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If you want to see what a fractal look like, there would be a fractal moving, and that's probably one of the fractals. So they got me in contact with, led me actually, to a fractal designer who could incorporate in these fractals sacred geometry, formulas that were very, very important and crucial to our development. And the sacred geometry that they showed was things that were pretty much, were already heard about, golden mean, proportions, so forth. And, I always stop and say, that's a picture, by the way, on the left, lower-hand side, I took in Stonehenge. And any of you been to Stonehenge? Yes. Well, if you've been to Stonehenge, you'll know that the going in between the blocks that have the least amount of space have the most energy. And that crop circle that you see over there on the lower right side, which is a golden spiral, was actually one of the only crop circles that appeared during the light of day and was witnessed, and people came out, and the guide went to his break. He said, I came out, and there's all these people looking in the field next to it. It happened in 20 minutes. And they could see kind of mist over the field, but between the ground and the mist, it was clear. So, that one's an interesting thing. You don't see that very often. So anyway, it suddenly was filled with these ideas of golden mean spiral, and this is the most powerful for transformation on cellular healing. The spiral is a measure of all creative forces. In fact, when I went to London to do a talk, I was booked into this hotel called Hotel Indigo in Kensington, and I had no idea, and I walked in, and all the walls were filled with these proportions. It was just incredible. It was the best place to sleep in. It wasn't a huge hotel or anything. But the harmonics of all living organisms are governed by a principle called the golden mean, or phi. It's a proportional geometry seen in the growth patterns of leaves and nautiluses and hands and ram's horns and bones and so forth like that. And these proportions, by the way, are all seen engraved in Egyptian temples as well as Gothic cathedrals. So, one other thing is they talked about intent. It was really important to infuse intent, the concept of intent, in anything that was energetic devices. And health and disease, by the way, are not set in concrete. If you've ever read Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief, that's a fabulous book to read, and he'll go into it. But they fluctuate accordingly to the thought and emotional patterns that make up the personality. And I experienced this firsthand because when I said I had a very difficult caseload as a therapist, I worked mostly with dissociative identity disorder. Now, back in the time that used to be called multiple personality disorder. And I had, for some reason, these clients attracted to me. And maybe it's because I liked challenges or difficult cases, or maybe it's because in some ways I would listen to them and not be judgmental too about some of the experiences that were going on that were very safe. But I had this one client who was very polyfragmented. To tell you quickly, a person splits off their personality into different alters when they've been abused before the age of 7 years old. The personality is developing before the age of 7, and if they've been traumatized either emotionally, physically, or sexually, to protect the sense of self and not to feel like the personality is annihilated, they will split off. It happened to somebody else. It didn't happen to me. Well, this person that I treated, she allowed me to tell her name. Her name was Valerie. And she was polyfragmented, meaning that she'd been abused by multiple caretakers since 6 months of age, and she had well over 100 different alters, and some were like fragment personalities. They only had a little wisp of a memory, where it was shared maybe with others. Anyway, every time she had to go to the OBGYN doctor, the doctor would request that I be there for the examination, only because in a prior visit, he was examining her, and a child alter came out, thought she was being abused, and went into a total abreaction, started crying and screaming. No, but doctor wants that to happen in the examination room for all the rest of the people outside, in the waiting room to hear. So he would ask that I be there to ground it to her, to make sure an older alter was out while the little ones were inside in a safe place. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because when she had one particular adult alter out, she showed all the signs of cervical cancer on her test. When another adult alter was out, there were no signs anywhere in her body. Now they retest because even the doctor was scratching his head, and the same thing happened. So I'm asking you to wrap your mind around that in the concepts of healing and belief. And that the power of the mind to decompartmentalize, and I know that's a concept that most of us probably, some of us are familiar with, but I've actually seen it. Now, of course, some of them were right-handed, some of them were left-handed, some thought they were males, some thought they were females. One, whenever a little one was out, if she looked in the mirror, she's an adult, she had to get on a chair to look at herself because she didn't think she was tall enough. So anyway, I like to, these clients taught me a lot about keeping an open mind. Now, I don't mean open mind so much that your brain is falling out, of course, but open mind about belief. And I had another experience like this. I speak in stories because I have a lot of personal stories, and they have taught me. And when I was first developing, just after I had gotten this device out, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, I came to Chicago again to visit my aunt on her birthday. By the way, her birthday is 89 this year. And my sister came in from Bali. She lives in Bali half the time of the year, and she came in to celebrate the birthday. And she was very sick. She had like a Bali bug. And she couldn't move. Those when you really have something that you can't move, you're just wiped out totally. I've never seen her like this. And I said, well, why don't we dial you up something on my device and let's try this out with you. So I did like a 60-minute program with her, and something to boost her immune system and energy and restore vital force and all these things. And I let her go in the other room, and we were in the kitchen, and she came back out an hour later, and she was all bright-eyed, and she said, I feel great, let's go do the Museum of Science and Industry. And I was like shocked, because it's like, you could barely move before. I said, you want to do a museum? And she said, sure, I feel fine. And I said, I couldn't believe somebody could make a turnaround this fast. So I asked her, did you do anything differently when you did the session? She goes, no, I just, sat down there and held the crystals, we'll just talk about it in a minute, and did whatever you said. Oh, but then I said to my guys, I am open to healing. Yes, right, that light bulb goes off. We have to ask permission. We have to want to. We can set our intention. I am statements are very, very, very powerful. And she taught me that I am open to healing. So that was where my guide, the intent, was talking to. And I had, this was in San Diego, a colleague of mine brought the technology once to a whole group of, I think it might have been Ion's group in San Diego. And he was just hanging around and working with some of the people there, and some of the people were getting on, and she said, Kathy, it's amazing. I came back, and all these people were saying their guides were coming forward and saying, can I help you with this? Can I help with that? On the particular healing thing. And she said, it's exactly what you were saying. You have to ask. But if your intent is to really truly heal, that way will be made open. And just one little last thing about intent. This is a crop circle, of course. Now, in May of 2011, I did a show in London. It was a Mind, Body, Spirit show. And I said to a friend of mine, well, let's go on up to Glastonbury and Avery, because I hear there's crop circles up there, and maybe we'll see a crop circle. And I said, and then we thought, no, let's see if we can create our own crop circle. An experiment, nobody expects it to work, but you figure, I'll just put it out there, and, I'll be really amazed if it happens. That's what I call my neutral idling state. Do not look for expectations. Stay neutral about it, and all good things usually happen. So anyway, the day we were going to leave, a popsicle showed up right by Silbury Hill, which is a very known sacred spot. And in this field, it looked like a planetary configuration. Now, that doesn't sound like anything. I mean, we do not have any symbols in our mind of what we were creating. We just said, we were supposed to have gone to Egypt the February before on this great sacred journey adventure for 2 weeks. And then Egypt, 2 weeks before we left, Egypt erupted in chaos. And everything was canceled, and we knew our great Egypt adventure was canceled and probably would never be the same if we went back there. So we said, this is going to make up for our Egypt adventure we never got. So we said, make whatever comes through something that we will recognize. Well, in crop circles, they say, pay attention if something is laid down after the first time it appears. It's called a phase 2 crop circle. And what happened the day we actually arrived was right in the middle, 2 pyramids, step pyramids. I'll give you a little close-up of that. And you see those little circle capstone tops on each one? You can actually lay in them. They were bigger than me, and I'm 5'4". And you could feel the energy. And he says, you can even create with nature. Nature will participate with you. Experiment. There are no boundaries if you think there. Only if you think there are boundaries and so forth. So that's my little aside about intent and getting back to actually the technology. They also said what was very important was sound. Now, sound art is frequency. There's not algorithms involved with particular music pieces, but it's a carrier way to get information to the body as well. And at that time, they started to tell me about something that was lost many years ago that was resurfacing called clavecchiotones. And these were used during ancient times in churches because they knew it brought about a resonance in the body for healing. And they were used by the ancient Gregorian chants in some ways, and they were allegedly lost by the Catholic Church. Wait. And they were discovered maybe about 35 years ago by a Dr. Joseph Paleo. Any of these tones were correlated with a lot of different things. And these are, there were 6 original tones, but there's 9 there. You probably all heard of love, 528 hertz and so forth like that. But sounds are used as a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious world. And the quickest way to enter the energy field is through sound. They act to strengthen the transmission of digital data to the cellular system. And these codes, the interesting thing about it is if you add each one of those up like 3, 9, 6, 3 to 9 equals 12, 12 and 6 equals 18, 12 and 6 is 18, and then you break down 1 and 8 equals 9. All those come out to either 3, 6, or 9. Now, if any of you are big Nikola Tesla fans, you'll know, this one back there, you'll know that Nikola Tesla said, if you only knew the significance and magnificence of the numbers 3, 6, and 9, you would have the keys to the universe. So, also some of the Fibonacci series numbers, if you take those numbers, they also come out to 3, 6, and 9. So, a lot of 3s and multiples of 3s and how we did things was also a very key component in putting it into this new technology. Now, then they said, well, how am I going to get this to the human body? And so that was the big dilemma, the transmission of all this vibrational waves to the body. And they showed me something in my head. Now, by the way, sometimes it would speak to me. Sometimes I would see pictures, and sometimes whole concepts would come down like a download of information that I had not had knowledge of prior to this. And then I had to cipher it through, but yet I understood what they were saying. So they looked at what was already existing in my database and showed me this picture. And they said to think Superman crystals. That, and as you remember, if you saw the movie, he's in the Fortress of Solitude, and he's downloading information through these crystals on his history, his race, and so forth like that. So the challenge was then how to put these algorithms, these fractals, these sounds, these this intent, into it and so forth like that, and it came to be in a software-based program that then could, working through the USB port of your computer, streaming information, all those algorithms, depending on what you were dialing up at the time, through your USB port into a digital to analog signal box, which is what's in the far right corner, because interestingly enough, the body is analog, and so are crystals. And so, even though this is a digital age, I had to translate it back from digital to analog, and then send it through quartz into these pure quartz crystal rods, which you can hold in your hand, place on your body, and I'm thinking, wow, this sounds really crazy, and other people are looking at me and go, oh, how Atlantean of you, Kathy, So, when those people start saying, okay, Kathy, this sounds a little woo, you've got some crystals going here, then somebody sent me a picture of the Hadron Super Collider in Eastern Switzerland, which I already knew some interesting things about, and where they're using the particle accelerator to split open, tiny and tinier subatomic particles to discover the God particle. And they showed me that at the site, the Super Collider, they were using over 60,000 of these crystal wands within their own technology, because science already knows crystals communicate with each other. Crystals give information to the body. And I started thinking, oh, why haven't we done this before? Yes, we can hold crystals in our hand, but they were telling me, no, we can't see the crystals that you're buying in the New Age stone shop. These crystals have to be lab-grown crystals. And I thought, oh, they grow crystals in a lab? And then I took 6 months to find a lab that would grow these crystals, because they had to start from a seed crystal, and it took a month to grow each of these slowly by adding silicon dioxide in an autoclave, because they needed to be perfect transmission clarity. They could take information quickly, all of those algorithms, and let go of it. Where more of the crystals you and I deal with, that through shows and so forth like that, hold energy in, hold things in, and we can hold negative stuff in too. This is like a self-cleaning oven. It cleans itself, which I didn't know was possible. So anyway, I put this all together, and by the way, this took 5 years. And I didn't tell anybody what I was doing except my sister and brother. Now, it was interesting because 2 months after I had my near-death experience, my father died. And he was the only one at the time I had told about my experience, because I knew my sister and my mother would tell me to go to the hospital, a cardiologist immediately, do not pass go directly. And my father would be more accepting and listen and so forth. So I told him about this, not knowing that he was going to die 2 months later. And just a little aside, when I was talking to my friend Jeannie about something else, he suddenly stopped and he goes, "Whoa, your father's here." Now, Jeannie had never met my father. I said, "Describe him." And he did. And, but a little bit of a younger version, so you can pick your age when you die. And he went back to wearing the mustache, which my mother hated. He said, he just came back and he said, "He just wants to tell you that you were right." And I said, "What was I right about?" Now, when I told my father about my near death, he didn't believe me. And being supportive, he didn't say, "Well, Kathy, that sounds crazy." He just said, "Oh, how very interesting. I'm glad you're still here." But he wanted to tell me when he passed over, because of what I had told him, even though I didn't have the full-blown angelic choir and everything else, he knew what it was all about. And he knew what to do. And he knew not to get, he knew that he had gone and passed over. And, let's just go for it and see what it's, so forth like that. So, parents don't always usually tell you you're right, but my father came back to tell me I was right. So, when he died, my mother died shortly, within a year after. And I was told by my guides that it was a pre-contract, that they would bow out during this certain time so they could leave me resources to develop this. And I had stopped working as a therapist and devoting all my time because this is what it was pushing me towards. And like I said, I didn't tell my friends because I knew they'd say, "Oh, poor Kathy, she's really gone off the edge here." And they thought that I was still consulting or doing something of that nature. And I didn't know if any of this was going to work. And I said, "Dear God, do not send me on a fool's mission. And besides that, I'm going through my whole inheritance here too." And so this was a real lesson in trust. Because sometimes, when I got really close to just saying, "I can't do this anymore, this is too hard, this is crazy," they would throw me another carrot. Now you're saying, who are these guys, that were talking to you? They identified themselves as the founders. They said they had been here since the beginning of time, that they only came during critical times through our evolutionary process. They came from the eighth, some of them came from the eighth dimension and beyond. It was not any planetary system or so forth like that. It was a consortium. And they said, "You have come here before to do this work as well." And they said, everything, and it's not your imagination, and this was back in 2003, they said, everything is speeding up. It's not your imagination. Things are manifesting faster, and people are having a hard time navigating this field. They're either getting chronically ill, checking out of the planet, changing careers, or, doing things that just are not the norm. And he said, for those who are going to stay during this time, some of them will need some help to help them transition to work with this energy, that's very disruptive, and to speed up their energy systems, where it will make it easier to fit them into a higher vibrational state, where then all healing and rejuvenation is possible. I'm not saying we're talking about cures here or so forth like that. And I thought, oh, what do I do? Do I do this as an anti-aging? Nobody's going to buy this as a spiritual machine. They said, no, it's a spiritual machine. And I thought I knew better, of course. But I found out later they were right, of course. The interesting thing is that I decided, a series of somebody told me to go debut it as the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energy and Energy Medicine, ICM. Crazy name, I know, which was started by Elmer Green at the Menninger Institute, which speaks of Kansas. And I went there. I'd never done a trade show before, and I displayed it. And I always display it for people to try free of charge and whatever. And people were getting on the device. I remember, I didn't even know if it worked at that point. But they said it's ready. So people were getting on the device, and I did not tell them at the time this came out of a near-death experience. The information came back. And this one gentleman came off the device crying. And I was concerned. I said, "Are you all right? How was that experience for you?" He goes, "That's interesting. I'm a medical intuitive." He said, "I saw all my own guidance come forward and were fine-tuning my abilities. Right on there, they became so crystal clear and sharp." He said, "And then I saw there's beings of light that were behind this device." He said, which was pretty incredible. And he said, "Then I saw this guy did not know me. I saw this man come forward, and he said he was your father." Now, this man obviously did not know my father was deceased. And he said, "Your father said he was very proud of you, and it was money well spent." Which is exactly what my father would have said. He's used that expression for money well spent. So many of the people who could see things energetically going on, but I can sense them, I can't see them. Once in a blue moon, I will. They always tell me you could if you really wanted to, but you don't want to. And so they were watching what was going on around the person. And they were really excited talking. This was the ICM board members. And they, because they were all dragging people over, they go, "You gotta watch and see what's going on." And what they were saying, well, I said, "Well, what do you see?" They said, "Well, we're seeing sharding coming out of the body right now." And I look over to see what was playing, and it was these emotional blockages. So it was coming out as sharding. And then he said, "Oh, now we're seeing this beautiful plumping coming out of the body." He kept using the word plumping. And I look over, and it was balanced energy centers, which is the chakras. And so people were coming back and giving me feedback the next day on what they experienced and so forth. And, all I could say is, "Oh, thank God that button works." And then a board member came to me and said, "You're probably wondering why we're all so excited." They said Elmer Green started the ICM organization because he said years ago that to look for this technology. It was coming, and he wanted to start an organization that would be open and receptive to people experiencing it. Now, I hadn't known this, and they said, "We've been waiting, and now this is it." And some said, it's the first time we think we've seen we haven't seen this technology, we didn't think we'd see this technology for a couple more lifetimes. It's in a different form, of course, but it's, with the crystals and things like that. So basically, what can we do with this? Well, interesting how numbers can help heal or set up a healing environment in person. This is technology that I'd like to say I didn't invent it, I helped develop it, but it came from outside of me because it was far beyond my experience and knowledge to be able to do this. We do it heart resonance. We use something like heart resonance, which opens the heart to giving and receiving love and forgiveness, and we work that with couples. Now, to this day, I wish I could go back and do couples therapy using it, because it'd be a wonderful thing, tying people together on it, using a splitter and having them experience their own thing. People find new hope. They're less reactive to family emotional triggers. It increases vitality. As my sister obviously came back, as I saw early on in the process, I have one person, she's a lieutenant commander in the military and a pharmacist by day, but also she did energetic medicine. I was saying, now, how do those two match? She's a pharmacist and this, she's in lots of things, but she goes and does her military training. She sets up something for herself to increase her muscle strength, increase her energy, increase her vitality. And last time she took her physical exam, she said, "I did 102 sit-ups in minutes," and she's 56 years old. And she said, "I've never been able to," keep cutting out here, "never been able to do something like that." And I said, "Oh, wouldn't you like to share with the rest of your military group?" She goes, "Hell no, I've got an advantage here." So we are working on it with ADHD, memory learning right now. We just done in England something with severe autism, where after about, she said it was like 6 to 8 sessions, the child was then using some words, before it just squeaked. This one particular child, it was allowing its mother to hold it, it was allowing itself to be touched by someone else. So what it does is it helps, just like I said, shift and change the energy in the person. And more people say that what they noticed is working with it, they have a more spiritual connection to their own guidance. And we use it for entity removal as well. And I kind of stumbled upon this by accident. I was doing an energy psychology conference in Toronto, and there was a psychologist who had our device and was using it with what they call a GBD testing device. And they put your hands in, and it reads the photonic field around the fingers and can make some wonderful graphs and shows you where the energies are. And, my device doesn't do that because they said we don't want any medical the part in there where it's actually measuring something, because you human beings are too wrapped up in judging how well you're doing by numbers. And this was not about judgment, it was about an opportunity to connect with your higher self. So anyway, so they use sometimes other devices, which is fine. And so one of the energy workers brought her teenage son over to the psychologist and said, something doesn't feel right about my son. Well, can you take one of those devices and see what's going on with him? So the psychologist ran that DVD on him, and then she says, come on over, I want you to see this. And, I see the energy around the body, and then there's this umbilical cord coming out with this kind of dysmorphic figure thing there. I said, well, what's that? So that's an entity, and I said, how do you know? I said, how do you know that's not the guidance or something like that? She goes, oh no, that was totally different. I teach this all over Canada for the manufacturers in Russia, and this is an approved device by the NIH. And she said, well, based on that, what would you suggest I do? And I said, well, I don't know, no one's ever asked me about entity removal. So I went inside and I asked them, and they said, do 6 minutes of release suppression to get rid of negative energy and psychic attacks and anything that, followed immediately by 6 minutes of divine alignment. You have to empty and then immediately fill and flood it with light. So that was like, 12-minute treatment. I thought, 12 minutes? Really? That's all? So we did it. Now the teenager had not seen that, what was on the graph. So he went in not knowing what he was dealing with, and he's unconscious at home. And so after he gets off of having a session, he says, I asked him, well, how do you feel? How was that like? And he goes, that felt so right. This was an interesting choice of words. So they immediately did a post-GDD on him, and it was gone. Now, I like to be a little bit more analytical, one more test, it's sort of like, well, it could have been a fluke. So I mentioned this to another psychologist friend of mine who had this problem with this teenager who would not sleep in his own bedroom. Now, that's unusual. He wanted to sleep in his parents' bedroom. Teenagers don't do that, then something is terribly wrong, and they moved into this new house, and then they found out that somebody had killed themselves in the teenager's room, committed suicide. They brought in somebody to kind of, work with the energy of the house, and it made it just mildly better, but not good enough. And the teacher said, his school dropping, he's really decompensating. They said he was changing his whole personality. And so the psychologist friend of mine said, so I just offered it to them, try it, whatever. He said, I remembered your protocol and see how that would work. And by the second session, the parents were saying he was sleeping back in his room. They were noticing a difference at school, and the father, who was a baseball coach, said, and something strange happened that we can't figure out. His coordination has improved in baseball. So sometimes you just don't know when you're aligned some way. Figuratively and literally, your physical body can start getting aligned just as your motor coordination and so forth else. So When people ask, what can you expect, we say, we don't know. They did not give me the cookie cutter of all the things, and we're still, even though this was debuted in 2000, end of 2009, we're still finding out things that it will do that are quite astounding. So I'm going to skip back a few things here. And we did find that it would change, this was in chronic fatigue syndrome, that it would change the structure of the eye, the irises. He did this for only 2 months. And her symptoms improved, and the eye doctor said we see the fibers are stronger, much more healthier. Burns, we do it with burns, and this is somebody who got burned 72 hours after the injury. Most of it is gone by redoing tissue repair with that and so forth. And the other, we also found that it would change hair color. Not something we anticipated. And sometimes it would do the whole shaft, and sometimes it would do the root. And the first time I had somebody complain to me who loved their beautiful gray hair, and they said, why is my hair turning dark? I thought it was my imagination, but my hairdresser says the same thing. And I said, well, she said, well, I'm not doing any reverse grading type of program or hair restoration or anything like that. I said, well, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm doing balanced endocrine system for my adrenals. And I said, well, you do know that when your adrenals are shot, you get gray hair faster. And if you're balancing out your adrenals, it may be doing something restoring hair. So what do? We not only do this for physical stuff, we do it for emotional release stuff, we do it for spiritual stuff, and we also, remember I said at the start I was anti-aging, we also do it for anti-aging. It's pre and post after 6 months. Now granted, she did her hair color and she's got some makeup on, but she used it for weight management and lost a lot of weight. And for me, I'm going to be 61 this year. And that's me in 1980, and me today. I haven't turned 61 yet, but there. I don't want to push it. It has kept me so young. I do boot camp in the morning, I do long distance swimming, I do long distance biking. I never did that stuff before. I was never interested in that stuff, but it changed my whole vitality structure. And so that was pretty interesting, and we found that you could put it on acupuncture points to open and speed it along, sending the information through the crystals, or to put it on actual injuries of the body. I was biking about a month ago, or 2 months now, month and a half, and I was wearing a helmet, of course, and a soccer ball came out of nowhere, and like a direct missile hit right to my head, and I was knocked off my bike on the beach path in Santa Monica and fell over into sand, and, immediately, it's like I felt like my energy had been knocked right out of me, and, I was able to bicycle home. I was okay. I thought I was okay. 2 days later, the headache started. I thought I was out of the water if I didn't have the headache the first day, and I see just a loss of energy. And so, I started to put one thing on. I felt a little bit better with a particular treatment, and I called up one of our doctors who has this device, and I said, I'm not doing quite what I'm supposed to. Kathy, a head injury is nerve damage. Are you running the nerve program? I said, no. Immediately I started running the nerve program, a half an hour later, the headache stopped, and they haven't come back, and that's 2 months ago. And I haven't had any problems since then. So we also looked at, I'm looking at time here. I know they told me to try and keep on track. DNA research. Oh, I got a reprieve. All right. So we went, does it change DNA? That was one of my big questions. And so we gave it to one of the top subtle energy researchers in the country, Dr. Glenn Ryan, who does nothing, and he's starting to invent. He's one of the forefathers in inventing some of these newer technology devices to look at subtle energy. And, he wasn't really familiar with the device. And so we gave him 3 programs to look at. One was stimulate reverse aging. The other one was DNA repair, stimulate DNA telomere repair, and the other one was divine alignment. Now, I didn't study much in divine alignment because divine alignment is for opening the crown chakra, getting in touch with your own guidance and so forth like that, and connecting to spirit. And, but I was curious, and so he tested all of them using liquid placenta DNA with the crystals suspended over, not in the DNA, because to put in the DNA would change it in and of itself, and use it along with it, combined. And he found out, he said, you've got, and this is on our website, he says, this is really interesting. He says, there's registering a high electrical conductivity. Now, there's no electrical current per se coming through this, but he says when there's a high electrical conductivity, it correlates with the ability of the DNA to repair itself. And what was it doing? It wasn't stimulating DNA repair. The one that had the highest, and the others were good too, but the one that had the highest was stimulate reverse aging. And so I started to think, wow, I guess that covers a bigger, wider scope. So interesting to see in the DNA research what it'll do too. But we know that across time and space, things are wireless. This is the information age, so we know that we can send information long distance, that separateness is really an illusion, and they found this out, through doing, the University of Paris doing research and finding out that subatomic particles could talk to each other long distance instantaneously. It didn't matter how far apart they were, and they were actually communicating faster than the speed of light. And we as human beings are big like transmitters and responders and receivers and everything else. And we're getting all that information. So it wasn't, we thought, okay, can we send this to people long distance? This was another experiment. So my guide said multiples of 3 are very powerful in the energy world, and so are people's names and photographs. So, by the way, this is a picture of my mother, not Mary Smith. And so we put the name 3 times on a piece of paper, and we put the crystals on it, and then what we did is we put the music over it and so forth, and played it, as you can see there, and we found we were getting just as good a result long distance as in person. Didn't matter how far. And in fact, the first time I did it was, that aunt that I'm visiting. Now, she doesn't believe in any of this stuff, or she didn't before at least. And so she had just got out of the hospital. She had a hernia operation. And a couple days after she got out of the hospital, I called her and she said, I got to go back to the doctor. My stitches are all inflamed. They're red. I think I've got an infection. And I said, this was another experimental thing, I said, would you like me to send you some healing energy? And she didn't know what that meant. I'm sure she thought I was going to pray for her. But I had her permission. I don't do anything without a person's permission. And so this was like a Friday. She was supposed to see the doctor on Monday. So I sent it to her on Sunday. And I thought, long distance, maybe I better send a longer one. 60 minutes. Because it's long distance. This was quite a while ago. And so I called her Monday evening thinking that she'd already been to the doctor to see what he would say. And I said, well, what did the doctor say? And she goes, I canceled the doctor. And I said, why did you do that? And she says, well, it was the darndest thing. Now, I played it Sunday. She did not know when it was going to be played. She said, I went out and played bingo with the girls. Now, she's a big bingo person. No matter how sick she was, she'd still drag herself to bingo. And she said, I was coming home from bingo and decided to take a quick shower, and as I was getting out of the shower, out of nowhere, all these flu-like symptoms attacked me. That's a detox reaction. I had given her a detox too in it, a little too much, 60 minutes. Well, it had other things in there too. And she said, I suddenly felt, I'm thinking like, oh my God, this is a expression, not for crying out loud, now I'm getting sick too. And she thought she would take a quick nap because she felt really wiped out. So she lay down to take a nap, and thinking that it was going to be a 10-minute nap, and did not wake up till the next morning. So 60 minutes was obviously a little bit too much. And she's a night owl. She's usually up past midnight watching television and so forth like that. So this was very, very unusual. She said, I woke up the next morning, And my stitches, he said the redness was gone, the swelling was gone, and I had all this energy, so I cleaned my house. And he said my cancer doctor made a follow-up appointment for another routine thing we were supposed to get together with, and she said I feel really good. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. She not only did not know the time I was sending it, she did not know what I was sending to react to a detox like that, and she didn't really believe in this stuff. You know? So it doesn't matter if the person's, and sometimes their intent or not. Sometimes my intent of wanting to help her helps open the way. So then we decided, can we do this in groups? Now, unfortunately, I'm sorry, this group is way too big to do it today here too. Well, we have done it in a big place where all people could get into a circle, and they did it at the Scripps Institute in the Life in San Diego, and 250 nurses. And they gave them something that they thought they would all experience, something to deal with pain relief. Because nurses are on their feet all the time, they're always experiencing some pain or swelling or so forth like that. So what they do is using crystal at one end of the circle and at the other end of the circle, and it goes around. People are holding hands, and that energy runs through the group and neutralizes anything. So it's not like you're picking up anybody's stuff. You know, it seems to neutralize, and when you play something like Divine Alignment, it's really beautiful. So then we thought, we can do groups. Can we help Mother Earth? Can we use this to help the planet? And when I first got that idea, I got chills. And my guys were saying, well, now you're finally thinking. And so the first time we tried it was on the Gulf of Mexico spill. So I called in a lot of our practitioners from around the world, and I said, we need to treat the Gulf of Mexico like a compromised organ. Its immune system has been compromised. Let's treat it like that, restoring vital force, helping it to detox, and all these other things, cleaning the lymph and so forth. So we all started running it for 2 days. At the second day, they capped the well. You know, and so when Fukushima happened, we decided, okay, we'll try it again. Same thing happened 2 days later. They capped the well, so sometimes it has a delayed effect. But the interesting thing was, we were getting calls in the middle of the night from someplace in Japan. No message, just dead airspace. And at first I didn't know where this was coming from, and we looked up the area called the country code. It's Japan. It's near Fukushima. I swear to God. and so I called the number. Now, I had to wait because of the time difference. They had no idea who at that number, because was 2 times that it happened, who was calling us. Somebody did speak some English. And, you know, they were totally in the dark, and it was sort of like a message from there saying, message received, thank you very much, you know, from Japan. And so try to work. We're not, you know, nothing's perfect, but we have noticed in certain areas you can start to use it to help trees grow. I had a group in San Antonio, Texas, when I was down there. They said, can we do anything to bring rain? There was a drought that was going on. It was terrible. You know, everything was parched. And I said, what would you do for rain? And you know, using a map, you know, of San Antonio or so. And I said, well, I don't know, but if I was to look at it physically, I would look at it as a backed up lymph system. And let's work on the lymph system of San Antonio. So they did. They all got together and started doing nothing but that. And within a couple days, I was getting emails saying, look on the Weather Channel. It was only raining in San Antonio. So we can affect Mother Earth, and we can imprint water with it. And for those of you who have an iPhone, we have a tiny little app that you might be interested in checking out. It only has balanced energy centers, feel good, and libido boost male, libido boost female. That's not just for the sexual energy, because it contains the creative life force, which is very, very important. And by that, you can put your hands on the screen, and it comes through that way because your phone acts like a crystal as well. So then we also looked at animals. We have a vet now in an animal hospital. And one of the first times we found that out, was somebody said, we have this little Yorkie Terrier that got into my chocolate snack. And, chocolate is deadly to animals, and it was like double chocolate brownies, very dense brownies. They rushed the dog to the animal hospital, and they couldn't pump its stomach because brownies were too dense. And so the doctor says, we don't expect them to get through this. It's going to start breaking down their life, vital organs and so forth like that. So they got on and started working on the animal 24 hours around the clock, turned it around, and that animal is fine today. So nothing is impossible. And the whole idea behind this is to trust in the process, because you never know, what they're telling you may sound like craziness, and all this came out of my near-death experience that sounds crazy, but it actually has been a wonderful discovery experience for me. And knowing that you can help make a difference in people's lives, even in people I don't know, and in parts of the world, so we're all here to try and make a difference. And sometimes it's small, sometimes it's large, and sometimes it doesn't matter the size or importance. It just means contributing, because we're all in this together. We're not islands. We're all interconnected. So for those of you who want to, you saw the little cat. Yeah, that's cute. Cats love it. That's on an iPad, by the way. So it's for an iPad, iPhone. I can't guarantee Android work, but it always works fine on the iPhone and iPad. It's like only a $3.99, so it's not a thing that. If any of you, I give away my books free. You can go to www.obooko.com and just type in Kathy Forti. These were the books originally that Carolyn Mays actually edited. And the first one deals with a little boy who's had a near-death experience. One of them deals with healing through sound, and I got enough time to quickly tell that sound story, which is it's fed into working with sound with this device called the Twinfinity 8. I spent a couple of years in Kansas, so yeah, it's a long story. Yeah. And I was roller skating one day, and I grew up roller skating a lot because my great uncle owned a roller skating rink in Chicago way back when, and my father and my aunts were rink guards, and so I learned to skate well. And so I was skating in this skating rink, and I was skating backwards, because for me, skating backwards is easier than skating forward, believe it or not. And it was packed, and somebody fell directly behind me, and there was no place to go but down. And so my hand went down to break my fall, and it really hurt. And I thought I just bruised it, but a couple